Candid conversations, unfiltered opinions, and humor with AVAG Beck's podcast.
Hello, welcome. Today we have Shane Spraggs with us. Mr. Shane is the co-author of a book, The Power of Remote, and he's also a productivity expert with over 25 years or 20 years in corporate. I'll let him explain more. Hi, Shane. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
So, Shane, let's delve into this a little bit. Productivity expert, what is that?
Well, I have forever, as long as I've been alive, I've just had this interest in making things and making people more effective, more efficient, and having, what's the fastest way of doing something? What's the best way, what's the way of removing steps from our processes and whatnot? My mom actually tells me a story of when I was younger. I would walk down the aisles in grocery stores and I would fix all the displays as I went by, and it's just been something I've just done through my entire life is just been interested in the rules of the game and how to make things as efficient as possible.
Wow, so good for you for turning your passion into a career. So when you were in the corporate space, because there's usually hierarchy and things of that nature, how did you navigate that to get to establishing this as a business for yourself?
I started off fairly early back in the good old days of the web bubble. I started a web development company, and so I was actually one of the owners of a business for quite a number of years. We did quite well and eventually exited. And then, I worked for Disney for a number of years as well. And so I had a good opportunity to see it from both sides, being the person who ran the show as well as a person who was on the totem pole, pretty low on the totem pole in a large business. For me, my preferred approach to dealing with any situation is asking questions, just understanding from the people I'm working with what their position is, what their understanding is, and helping them discover the ways to fix things and how I can help. And it all depends on how they expect me what they expect from me as well. If I'm just there to provide information versus there to help change things, it can just change it affects the discussion. But yeah, starting with questions is always the best approach.
So do you think that applies for leadership? Because there's usually that disconnect between leadership and the people who report to them, where it's kind of like do as I say approach, as opposed to understanding what goes into the day-to-day functioning. And you've had the opportunity to occupy both spaces, right? As a leader of your own company and also having somebody that you report to. Was there commonality, in addition to asking questions that you said was important or you felt was important?
Yeah, for me, it really comes down to understanding and having the compassion to understand the differences in the roles that people play. Having the variety of roles in the past has given me this appreciation for recognizing the people who are in the front line, as I often say, the people who are the employees of the business. They should be your experts, and you should trust their feedback. I've seen it time and time again where businesses fail because they have somebody in place who knows what's going on, but nobody asks them ask them for their feedback.
Right.
And the manager or the leader or the team assumes that they know what's best, and they don't go get the information from the people who are really the experts, and so having that sense of, if you're a manager, your job isn't to necessarily be the best person at the work you're doing. Your job is to be the best person at managing their time.
Oh, but they have degrees.
Well, the further away you get from the actual work, the less you know about it. You can maybe understand the bigger picture and how it affects customers and how it affects team members in a broader sense. But the specifics of doing the actual work really need to fall into the hands of the people who are responsible for it. And as a manager or a leader, you need to get them to involve them in the conversation.
So do you think, or do you see in your practice and your experience so far, that involving team members and, the people on the front line not only creates a healthy work environment, but also makes them feel like they're part of the success of the company, regardless of, a stake in shares or anything of that nature.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me tell you how a typical company does, let's say, year-end planning.
Okay.
A bunch of executives will go off on a multi-day retreat. They'll spend some time maybe enjoying the social side of things. They'll finally get their act together, get into a room. They'll spend 4 hours together in a room, and they'll put a bunch of ideas on the table, and then they'll pick the things that need to be done, and then they'll come back and tell everyone, hey, we made these big decisions. And they almost often always fail in that situation, because not only is the team not aware of the the direction they've taken, they're not bought into it. It's not informed decisions, and then they do a very poor job from that point forward in keeping track and executing on it. What's most successful is you start off by saying to your team, say, hey guys, give me a list of things we can improve next year. Where do you see the challenges are? You don't necessarily have to act on everything, but you do need to collect that information and use it as your basis for decisions. Also pulling information from your market, you pull information from your competitors and other areas, and you go into that conversation with as much informed as possible. And then when you come out of that conversation, you may have decided, hey, these are the 5 priorities we're going to use for the year. You can go back to your team and say, here's why I picked these and why we didn't go with what you said. Or thank you for providing that suggestion. We've decided to go with that. And that just brings them along for the ride, makes them feel a lot more listened to, and you'll get more work out of them because of that.
All right. So all of that has an essence of humility and checking the ego, right? How many leaders do that, and how important is that in leadership?
I think you almost always find the best leaders are the ones that listen to their teams and do check their ego time and time again. If you go through and pick any number of leaders, I don't want to get into any particular ones that are going on right now because there's some pretty hot topics with respect to that. But the ones who are remaining pretty quiet these days are the ones that are likely leading their team to greater success. I think there was the quote that culture eats strategy for breakfast is still rings true today, where the essence of that is that Gladwell said that back in 1990s. The idea behind it is strategy is you telling people what to do. Culture is people understanding how to do it and having a way of going about it. My perspective of culture is that if you really start breaking it down, it's the collective habits of the organization. So it's the stuff you just do naturally. And most people think about culture in terms of either social, hey, we have a ping pong table. That's part of our culture. We have Jean Fridays. You can wear your jeans on Fridays. That's not culture. That is the social aspects you're trying to impose on your team. What the team does without your direction is culture.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I agree with that. And there is this known phenomenon that decisions are not made in the boardroom. Sometimes decisions are made in those cultural imposed behaviors where just because Jessica's son plays lacrosse with my son and I know Steven's wife who's cousins with, Alyssa, that is why I, will give this person a promotion over basically promoting mediocrity over quality and qualification. What would you say to a culture within a workplace that does that?
I start with the basic foundation of assuming that, and I think this is largely true, that everyone is smart. People know what's going on, right? You take your typical worker who's been hired to do a job. They know what's happening. They understand more than people give them credit for. And when they see people getting preferential treatment, decisions being made in the back room or in the hallways as opposed to in plain sight with transparency, that affects the way they work. It affects their appreciation for the work, for the role that they have and the company they're working for. And, it it often just degrades their experience at the office. It takes work. It does. A good leader isn't a leader by chance. It's not something you're born with. You need to, you might be born with the ability to sway people, but that's only, that's a very small part of it. You need to be fair. You need to do the work. You need to establish good structures and a good methodology for your business that treats everyone the same way and gives everyone a fair shake.
So how much should a company pay attention to leaders or managers who have repeated reports of toxic behaviors and leadership styles? Because sometimes I see the conversation being chalked to, hey, we kind of like expect a turnover because, this policy was enacted or whatever. But with a consistent back-to-back similar sounding report, how soon should a company act?
So a couple of things there. One of the things that it's important to recognize, the manager's job is to ensure that the people doing the work are kept busy and informed. Simply as that, right? We learned during the pandemic that managers, when we started going to remote work, the managers were really the key to successful remote working. For a company that just, if for those companies that went from in office to at home, they were able to maintain for a bit. People had the work on the schedule, and they were able to keep their ability to do their job. But very soon after that, the managers who couldn't facilitate the work with their staff started to break down and started to fail. And I often say we had a management problem before the pandemic. We've often heard this idea of taking a good employee and turning them into a bad manager. And we've been talking about that for years. Managers have consistently received poor training, poor mentorship, and we just assume people know how to do it. And it's a skill that people need to learn and get good at. And it's not something you can get good at just by reading a book. You need to work with somebody and so you often hear about people, this concept, people don't leave bad companies, they leave bad managers. And it's such an important thing and then when the pandemic happened, we took all these bad managers who didn't know how to manage people in person and forced them to do it without being able to see their teams, and just made things worse.
Yeah.
Right?
So the importance of training, because not everybody has the interpersonal skills to manage. Let's just set that record straight. In addition to a resume, an impressive resume, the training, the interpersonal training, is it advisable from your experience that a manager gets to not on a personal level know their team members, but also understand the day-to-day of what goes on with a particular position or job description? Because there's usually sometimes unrealistic expectations, right? That, really puts people who actually genuinely want to do good in their, respective position to just basically buckle or leave, right? So
Yeah.
What is your take on that?
Well, there's no illusion that being a manager is a tough job. You not only have to understand the characteristics and the personalities of your team, but you also have to be able to manage up and deal with your superiors, right? Because you're also an employee. You're also an employee to the directors and the VPs of the company. So a manager they need to understand how their role fits in the business and what they're responsible for. And there's a lot of different kinds of managers out there. They could be, responsible for delivering a product or service. They could be responsible for a segment of the business. They could be, typically they are looked at the person who is asked to implement a strategic plan. So directors go off and VPs go off and figure out, hey, let's go hit this target this year. And it becomes the manager's job to break that down. And so a good manager will work with their team to figure out how that's possible, and then create a plan and work with it. What most managers aren't aware of is that when they get started in the role, it's a lot less fun in a lot of areas than they expect. There's work to be done to keep track of people's tasks and keep track of people's deliverables and keep an eye on everyone else's abilities and where they need to improve. And putting together a performance plan is very difficult for people. And you get a team of 5 or 6 people or even more, it just compounds it. So a lot of people just end up winging it and unfortunately doing a bad job. And so, from a training standpoint, from my standpoint, there's no better investment a company can make than helping to improve their management layer and training them how to handle the various responsibilities of their role.
Thank you. So my next question, what should employee do, whether a management level employee or somebody who is considered a floor staff, do if, again, like you said, employees are not stupid. If they recognize that there has been practices that are not only toxic but unfair, what should they do? Because let's be honest, HR is always going to protect the company. Okay. Yeah. And in doing so, may actually side with a toxic manager, right? As an employee, what should an employee do? Whether you plan to leave the company, whether you plan to stay with the company, what should you do?
Yeah, unfortunately, the ultimate responsibility falls on the employee to decide whether they want to work there. Right. So that's what it comes down to is you have this choice of do you continue giving them your time in exchange for their money? And is that a role you want to continue being in? Remote workers know this quite a bit because in companies where there are people in the office versus people remotely, it's very difficult for a remote worker to get the visibility and get the face time with the people who make those decisions for advancement and whatnot that is needed for them to get promotions and be treated fairly. And so on the surface, the best, try to find ways to bring it up and talk to people. I always advocate for a conversation over an email or a text message. As soon as you put something in writing, it's easily misunderstood. It's easily copied and pasted. I can't tell you how many times a negative email has been forwarded to other people in the staff and creates a larger challenge. And have conversations with the people you feel comfortable with. Obviously, if you don't feel comfortable with anybody, that's a real problem. And then you really need to be just thinking about your career options. And then again, these days, they may be limited because, it's not necessarily an employee's market these days. It's an employer's market. So find champions, find people you feel comfortable with. And HR is you bring a good point. Be careful how you present things to HR. They are not necessarily there for your benefit. They're there to protect the company in a lot of cases. And I've heard far too many stories of people taking their concerns to HR and it turning it on them in the end. Sit down with the manager. Again, start with asking questions. Hey, can you help me understand? I love those words. Can you help me understand how this is working? And ask them to explain to you how things are working and see if you can help them come to a realization through asking questions that they've either made a mistake or that there's an inequity in the business you're working with. I won't paper it over. It's not easy. There's work to be done. You got to be very careful and have conversations as opposed to write emails.
All right. So do your best to have a conversation. If it's a level-headed human being, they will be decent. If they're not, they will not be decent, and that's okay.
Yeah, and just follow up with documentation. If you feel that it's going down a path that you may be out of your control, there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, thank you for the conversation. Here's what I heard, and then sending that out as an email. Again, try not to be negative. That's the only thing you can control is what your approach to things is and how you show up.
Okay, great. I love it. And let's talk about your book, right? Can we see the cover for everybody who's watching? Is the beautiful cover. It says The Power of Remote.
Yeah.
All right. Let's talk about the power of remote, Shane. What is that?
So it will come as no surprise that we started writing this book in the middle of the pandemic. It seems like a long time ago now, but I can't believe it's almost been 5 years since we pulled the trigger on office work. And so much has happened since then that it's hard to really wrap it into a single conversation. But At the time, we wanted to share our best practices. I was working with Cynthia Watson. Cynthia she's been a remote worker for ages. You did her master's in 1993 on telecommunication. That's what we used to call it before it became just remote work. And I brought in my experience leading teams and running companies into it, and really wanted to provide a whole holistic view of, hey, you've got a company. Here's the things you need to do to manage remote workers and be successful remotely. I will die on the hill that, having remote workers doesn't make you less or more successful. It just gives the employees more flexibility. So instead of me getting up in the morning and driving to an hour to work, an hour home afterwards, I can just be at my desk and do my job and get my work done faster, more productively than I would be in the office. In fact, there was just an article that came out recently that talked about how remote companies are twice as productive and have been twice as successful as companies that have remained in the office. Sadly, there's been lots of return to the office movements recently, but I understand that these large companies are not set up to handle a large remote workforce, and it's understandable in a lot of different ways. There's obviously a lot of assumptions on why they are doing it. Everything from ways to fire people without having to pay for their severance, to issues with too much empty office space downtown. My feeling towards it is that they're just not able, from a cultural standpoint, make that shift required to be a remote team. So yeah, the book contains strategies for managers, executives, and HR people on how to manage people, be strategic, and hire people and handle the HR side of things.
So culturally, do you think we'll ever get to a society where remote work is fully embraced? Because the one thing I hear from managers and leaders is that, well, I can't see what they're doing. So it's giving micromanaging, right? So how can we ever move to where we can trust our employees to do what they're supposed to, what is expected of them, without feeling that we have to keep an eye on them or have our eyes fully on them at all times?
Since the book came out, like I said, there's been a lot happen in the last 5 years, and one of the things that doesn't get enough conversation is the fact that largely how we work has changed. We send fewer emails. We do a lot of messaging over Slack or MS Teams. There's a lot of text-based communication, asynchronous texting to each other. We do fewer in-person meetings. Doesn't matter whether you're in an office or not. You do team meetings, you do Zoom meetings, and fewer people are flying to meet with customers. They're just doing the majority of those conversations over video. And the way we've worked has really changed. And what I'm seeing is that, yes, we have fewer remote-only businesses than we used to, but almost all businesses have a component of hybrid in it. The ability for people to work 1 or 2, maybe 3 or 4 days a week at home and be in the office for one of those other days. That's changed the landscape, and we are already as a society more comfortable with that than we were 5 years ago. We're comfortable with the idea that someone can say, okay, I'm just going to work from home today. I'm not feeling too well. It has other implications. Obviously, it means that we're getting people to work while they're sick, but at least they're not coming to the office and making other people sick. And we're all, my expectation is that if you just take a look at how companies start, a entrepreneur is not going to spend $5,000 to $6,000 a month setting up an office and working from that office, and then limiting their pool of expertise to their geographic location. Right? They're going to work with people all over the globe. In fact, an entrepreneur is likely going to work with cheaper labor outside of their local area until such time they can, and yes, there'll be some times they'll hire people who they can see and touch and whatnot. And I've got nothing against people working together in person. I think there's definitely some benefits and value there, but there's also some benefits and value for people working from home. And you take these companies, and if you imagine that the majority, and this is easy, I think an easy assumption to make, the majority of businesses that start in the next little while will be remote businesses, right? And if you play that forward 5 or 10 years, what do we expect? Well, these businesses will never find a time where they'll grow, say, to 10 to 20 to 30, 50 people. There'll never be a point in time where someone's going to say, hey, it's time to build an office. It's time to open doors, and we're going to force all the people who we've been working with, we have close personal relationships with, who've brought the company through hard times to be successful. We're now going to force them to come to my geographic location in order for us to have an office.
Yeah.
Some will, but most won't. And so my belief is that we're seeing that the next Amazons, next Googles, next Apples are actually being built in the basements of people's houses right now.
Yeah, that's my basement. So, yeah. So what is the financial benefit to these companies when they actually invest in everything to support remote work as opposed to the traditional brick and mortar, come into the office, sit in a cubicle? We have to know when you're going on break, when you're taking a bathroom break or a kitchen tea break. What are the financial benefits to these companies? And also on the flip side of it, when we're talking about culture, right? What is the culture within the company? What does it feel like when employees feel supported to work remotely as opposed to being forced back into the office, especially in situations where life happens? A kid is sick from school. I could have been home working and also keeping an eye on my kid. But now I have to find a babysitter, and that's posing a problem. Have to travel an hour commute to work because you demand I'm in office.
Yeah. Well, the benefit for a business is largely productivity and being able to do more with less. And I would argue that it comes down to trust in a lot of respects. And the trust you have to impart on your remote workers to allow them to be busy on their own time and deliver the work that you expected from them. If you were to apply that same level of trust to your in-office workers, you wouldn't be asked to keep track of all your coffee breaks, and being able to ask, to leave from work early. That's the same problem, right? And so, I mean, there's a lot. The culture side. There's a lot of benefits and a lot of pieces to it. Everything from people feeling like they have more control, being more accountable to the work and therefore feeling more engaged and having more buy-in and wanting to contribute to the success of the business, to saving money on the office. There's a very tangible expense, although I'd argue that some of that money should flip over into learning and development. I think that the companies should do more to fill a bit of the gap. You do miss the ability to learn from others when you work from home, because you're not there. You don't see them. You don't walk over to their desk and, hey, what are you doing? Oh, okay. I found this cool app yesterday. Look what it does. And you lose some of that. So you need to have some intentional processes in place to recreate that or teach people that stuff. But there's some other intangible things that people don't expect. Remote workers have far less drama than people in the office. It's absolutely true. No one's getting upset because someone microwaved fish in the kitchen, right? People don't have the conversations that people are having that bring drama into the office. And my experience has been that remote businesses, people just get work done, right? It's just, and they're calm. They have fewer problems from an HR standpoint, from a conflict. There's less conflict to resolve, and that leads me to one of the other big realizations about remote work. Remote work allows you to have your social life outside of the office.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the other cultural change that really helps the neighborhoods you live in. Because now you're not going to the office to get your social fix. And most of us, let's be honest, need a social fix, right? Some of us don't. Some people need way too much social fix, but for the most part, on average, people need to be able to interact with human beings on a regular basis in order to feel whole. But if you can go do your work for 6 to 8 hours a day, and then go outside the house, you participate in a club, some sort of sporting activity, a choir group, whatever you want to do, right? Whatever floats your boat, as they say. That's better for you as an individual. And it's better for the company because you come back to the work the next day not looking for that social fix from the business.
I absolutely agree with that. And efficiency, you said a number of things about efficiency, getting the work done and, just being a rock star. What would you say to this notion? Going back to micromanaging, if I am an employee, I am able to be efficient. Say my highest productive hours are between the hours of 10 and 2 p.m., right? And I'm talking from a nursing standpoint. I have about 15 to 20 people to make phone calls to. I already know what I'm asking, what I'm following up, and how to help these people. I'm scheduled to work an 8-hour day, which might be 9 to 5, might be 8 to 4, but I'm working remotely. If I'm able to get my calls done, documentation showing that I got this calls done, everybody that I outreach to can verify that I did the outreach, right? Is there a reason to demand a full 8 hours if I'm still able to meet the metrics that was required for me for that day? Is that something companies need to focus on? Because when you sign your employment agreement, you signed and agreed to work 40 hours a week, which translated loosely to about 7.5 to 8 hours a day.
My opinion is if you get the work done, you got the work done. Right? If you did it in 4 hours versus 8 hours, good for you. That's the way it should work. Yeah, and we as a society we've long equated time with money, right?
Yes.
It's $20, $30 an hour. It's what you get for doing the. And in my past, I ran a services based business. It was always interesting to me that you put a quote out for a bunch of work and say, okay, it's going to take you 100 hours, and we'll charge you $100 an hour. It'll cost a client $10,000. If we put someone who knew how to do the job on that project and they did it 50 hours shorter, does that mean we get less money for the project?
That's the question.
Right? So this is where some of the transformation starts to happen. If we can move away from hourly based work, and obviously there's people out there. There's definitely a lot of variety in types of roles, and that I'm not going to be able to cover everything with a one swoop. But there's a lot of roles out there that are not task based but goal based. What you just talked about was a set of goals. I need to accomplish this work in order for it to be completed. And if we can start writing our job descriptions and managing people based on the expectation, then we can do a better job of measuring their how well they're accomplishing the work and rewarding those who do more work as opposed to accomplish more things. And so as a business, if they can start by creating some metrics around what does success look like for the people's roles rather than measuring the hours, that's a major first step in starting to trust your team.
I agree with that wholeheartedly, because if I'm able to accomplish the goals that are set for the day, it gives me room to learn the extra things that I may use in my practice, or I may just, follow up with that person I had a call with yesterday that I actually plan on calling in 2 days or tomorrow. I may just follow up today, to see if there was anything additional I can do. I think this is where we start seeing those rock stars, right? So as opposed to a performance appraisal that is based on my own bias of an employee, I can actually see where they're going that extra mile, right? I had somebody so lovingly said this to me years ago, and I'll never forget it. We were talking about something being completed, and I'm like, oh, I've already done my stuff, and I have to help this person with this, this needed to be done. She's like, I need to stop you right there. Nobody around here is like you. You're Buzz Lightyear, because how much of that are you rewarded for? And that stopped me in my tracks. I was like,
Absolutely. Yeah.
my goodness, you're right. It's like you're Buzz Lightyear, you go above and beyond. We don't do that to infinity and beyond. We don't do that because it's not recognized. It's everybody's counting down to the minute. Everybody's counting down to when did you leave for lunch? When did you come back from lunch? Did you take 10 or 15 minutes break? And when did you leave finally for the day? And which was really breathing a lot of toxicity within the team and really low morale. But that was not, productivity, you have to. It's like, okay, since I know I can finish this task in 6 hours, I'll stretch it to 8 hours since that is what you want me to do.
Yeah.
And that was something that, at that time I was managing a team. I'm like, oh my goodness, like, ladies, just, get your stuff done. I don't care. Just get it done. I don't want to have to, run after people. So let's talk about flexibility. How important is it for an employer to be flexible with their employees, in a sense, or their reports, I should say? So if an employee is having, you talked about being sick, if an employee is having, say, a medical procedure, right? But they're willing because their work 100% does not require physicality, right? If it's a teaching opportunity, right? Where remote teaching is possible and has been done before, right? Do you think this is a time for the employee or a group of people, employer, or group of managers to demand in person or nothing, like an all or nothing for somebody that has been consistent? And what does that mean for business?
Yeah, and I'll start by saying, obviously, every business is different. They all have their unique criteria and setup and whatnot. But for me, it all comes down to expectations. Flexibility, what I think is flexible is different from what you think is flexible. And so if we both come into it saying, hey, we have flexible work here, someone's going to break that bargain. Someone's going to overstep. So it's immensely important for businesses to outline what that means, and especially to new employees, right? If flexibility to one business is that, hey, you get to work from home one day a week, and that day is Friday, and you have to be at the office, so you have to log into the office from 9 to 5. And show you're online, but you can work from home.
Right.
That's different from, hey, we don't care, come in the office, do your thing, and here's how you're being measured, and so on and so forth. So neither is wrong if they approach it from the standpoint that we are being honest with their staff, we're giving them the rules of the game, and as an employee, you're joining that team, right? Say, okay, I understand what flexibility is here. I'm gonna work under that scenario. It's when they change it, and this is what goes back to what you were just saying. If an employee has an expectation that they can go work from home, and they feel they're demonstrating that they are being successful from home, and the employee pulls a return to the office card out of the deck, then that's a breach of trust. Right? That's a breach of relationship, and now you have a problem.
Right. Good to know, because I've seen it quite a bit, especially when it has to do with medical needs, proven medical needs that have solid concerns. So let's talk about this return to work policy that most companies have. And with I don't know if you're aware, this is 2025 January, for who I don't know when you're listening to this. There's a new strain of respiratory, infection.
Yeah, RSA,
coming on very strong. And there is a concern of another mass mandate or, kind of like going remote again. Would a company who's actively pursuing a return to work policy and this looming, how should they adjust or reframe their practice, if at all they should?
Yeah, it's yet again, everywhere you turn, there's some additional benefit for remote working, and reducing the amount of the sick days is a huge one, right? The companies pay a lot of money each year for people not to work because they're homesick or for other reasons, and it's statistically remote workers have fewer sick days. I worked for a remote company, 40 people for quite a while, and over that time, I think I saw 2 people take a sick day. 40 people, years. It was incredible, and so it should be something that employers are looking at as a sort of silver bullet, if they can wrap their heads around the other parts of it. Again, from a company standpoint, they need to have their management layer figured out. Mm-hmm. They need to have people who aren't going to micromanage and understand how to, impart accountability, make people feel comfortable, give people trust for the work they're doing. Otherwise, they're just going to have more chaos, and it isn't going to work for them. But it's such an obvious solution when we have these waves of disease and epidemics come around. And yes, we just had COVID, and it's kind of largely out of the way now. But every year we have flu season. Every year we have some bad norovirus come through, or whatever you want to, and they go through offices like wildfire.
Yeah, people have kids, and kids are big vectors for especially with respiratory infections. So if my kid is sick and they brought something from home, and it's just a matter of time before I take it to the office,
Exactly.
And I would think this would be a benefit. So let's talk about consultants, and this is wrapping the conversation. You mentioned, what if you have a consultation with a company, and you mentioned the amount of money, and you put an expert on the project, and it's done in a shorter time. Does that mean you get paid less? For people in the consultation space, there's usually this notion that, because I'm either freelance or consulting, I will do things at my own pace, right? Because you're technically not the boss of me. You're consulting for my skills. What would you say to those populations?
Yeah, I think this day and age, the free market kind of takes care of a lot of that. There's a lot of competition for everything. There's a lot of people who can do everybody's job. And for the most part, the skills are relatively the same, in terms of if you go find a graphic designer, one end, there's going to be good graphic designers and bad graphic designers, but mostly they're all fairly good. And again, comes down to how economical it is to hire that person. And so it's just a matter of, from a consultant's perspective, keeping in the back of your mind that you are competing with everybody else in the world for that role. And you may have some leeway to overcharge in some cases, but at the end of the day, the employer has, or the company you're working with has the opportunity to switch out to different providers. So there's sort of a unspoken responsibility there for you to provide good services at a reasonable price, on time, and with a smile. Right. Mm-hmm. So, right. So I would say just be careful with it. Just, in terms of, you might get away with it for a bit, but it's so easy these days for word to get around that you're bad, you're hard to work with, you're expensive, that sort of thing. So just be careful.
I like that. I like it a lot. So thank you for being here, Shane. We appreciate you.
All right.
And take care.
Thanks for tuning in to Avik Beck's podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review. It really helps us out. We'd love to hear your thoughts and continue the discussion. So join us on social media or drop us a message. Until next time, keep exploring, stay curious, and keep pushing the boundaries of your world.